Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha TV. I'm Tracy Shilji, and on the big picture today, we're taking a closer look at the developing situation in Spain. The government has said that it would begin the process of imposing direct rule on Catalonia in an unprecedented move to crush the region's independence bid. Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy has said that it would, for the first time in the country's history, invoke Article 155 of the Constitution, a provision that allows the central government to suspend the autonomy of the Catalan regional administration. What would these measures be? And does the Catalonia crisis carry any risk for Europe? To help us understand this story better, we have in studio Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, former ambassador, joining us. We have Pramit Pal Chaudhary, consulting editor, foreign affairs editor at the Hindustan Times, and also Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, who's from the Center of European Studies at JNU. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me here on the big picture. Mr. Mukherjee, if I could start with you, just first of all, how do you assess the developing situation there? Was this on the anvil as you have been watching developments there? And what do you think is going to be, the likely developments in the next few days?
Well, to answer your last question first,
yes.
What is going to be the likely developments in the next few days, I don't think anybody knows,
okay.
not even the protagonists. I mean, the situation is so much on tenterhooks as we speak, in fact. This has been easily probably the gravest constitutional crisis that Spain is facing. And it's a relatively young democracy. It was only in 1978, after General Franco died, and his dictatorship was finished, that Spain, promulgated its constitution and became a democracy. And it has 17 what we call districts or states, 17 areas, of which Catalonia is one. And from what I understand, the movement for autonomy or something approaching independence or self-determination, call it what you will, has been around since the 1920s, 1922 or something. But it has obviously gathered steam only in recent years.
Yes.
So there are, I mean, nobody really can assess exactly within Catalonia how many are, the government of Catalonia says that in the recent referendum, 90% voted for independence, although the voter turnout may not have been that high.
That's right, just about 43%.
But I mean, it's an extremely confused situation, yes, where you have Catalonia and the government demanding independence, having declared to the government that if they use Section 155 of the Constitution, which you referred to in your report, to suspend its autonomy, then they will go ahead and formally declare independence. The state, in fact, has said that they will go ahead and impose direct rule if that happens. There have been noises coming out of the ruling government in Madrid that Section 155 will be imposed, but, since nobody wants a head-on confrontation and violence and stuff like that, that there may be options available which are graded, implementation of Section 155. Things are up in the air. Mediation by the EU has been ruled out. The EU itself is scared because you've got separatist movements elsewhere in Europe. You've got Bavaria, you've got Flanders, you've got Scotland. So as we speak, my feeling is that, and I'm not basing this on any special knowledge of what's going on there, but a kind of gut feeling that a total confrontation probably will be avoided. Nobody wants, another crisis affecting not just Spain, which is one of the larger European countries, but Europe, which is already awash in problems of immigration, of Brexit, of right-wing, sort of the right wings moving up and up in the political spectrum. Witness Austria recently. Nobody wants another huge headache, particularly with others waiting in the wings with similar demands.
All right. So, Professor Sachdeva, the answer really lies in what measures are going to be taken, when Article 155 is imposed. What does it entail? Because it's pretty vague. It's going to be imposed for the first time, so no one really knows as to what it would eventually be like on the ground when that is, imposed. Can you give us an idea of what are the measures that we may be seeing?
Well, I mean, as you said, this is going to be used first time, if it is going to be used.
Yes.
It basically means that central government will take over, autonomy would be suspended. Things which are under the control of Catalonia, particularly education, health, police services, a couple of other taxes, they would come under direct control. But you know, it's more political rather than actually looking into certain sectors here and there. Now, what has been happening now for the last couple of weeks and couple of years, actually, one would say. Now, both sides are trying to, you know, kind of push others, trying to see the resolve from the other side. Now, autonomy in Catalonia has been up and down for the last 100 years. If you look before a Spanish Civil War, there was a lot of autonomy. Then during Franco's time, it was suppressed. Since then, under different, 70s and then again 2005-06, some more autonomy were granted. Again, it was taken back in 2010-11. And they already, this was not the first kind of unofficial referendum. In 2014 also they had one referendum, which was also, I mean, they said people have... Now I think what is really happening is, what Catalonian leadership is looking, I mean, as they have been saying again and again, that we are looking for some kind of dialogue with the central government. Now obviously when you are saying dialogue with the Spanish government, obviously they are not going to negotiate independence with them. They also pretty know this. Now Spanish government so far, union government has ruled out any kind of negotiation, because what they have said is that you have done certain illegal acts which we don't accept, because this whole constitution, I mean this referendum business was never illegal, officially approved.
Yes.
Now in this kind of murky situation, I think what is really they are looking for from the union government, they are putting pressure for agreeing on some kind of legally binding referendum. Now, which of course they do not want. I mean, so far they have given no indication of any kind. And I think why things have slightly calmed down, I would say, in the last 2-3 weeks is because leadership in Barcelona was looking for some kind of support from some European countries or from EU, which has been clearly ruled out because of various reasons which Ambassador has also mentioned. So now since they are not, no kind of, help is coming from EU or from any other major European country, and even from Russia, all have said that this is an internal Spanish affair. They have to work out certain solution within the Spanish constitution. So what it means is that Catalonian government would be pushing for some kind of legally binding referendum, which perhaps they may not agree, but within the Spanish political scene, I think apart from the the ruling conservative party, but there are other political parties. I think behind the scene there is certain kind of pressure on Spanish government from certain EU government and also from other political parties to find some kind of solution. Now what that solution could be? Maybe some kind of talk of further autonomy for Catalonia, because still it's mostly a unitary government. So maybe in the long term some kind of federation within Spain. Now all these are speculations. We do not know anything about this because nobody has really kind of opened these. But I think both sides would be kind of pushing for this. Now whether they will make a compromise or actually what the Spanish government at the moment is saying, that if you have declared independence, then of course we will deal with it accordingly. We will take control of the situation, which in a very vague manner they haven't said that Now I think this will continue for a couple of more days, and we'll see by tomorrow if actually this happens. But I think my feeling is that they will try to find some compromise, both sides.
All right. Let's just talk about the role of Carles Puigdemont then, Pramit. He emerged as a hero of sorts after that referendum. He did speak very strongly, when that vote actually came in. Like it was pointed out, he claimed to say that 90% of the people do want independence. But, as the days progressed, we did see, of course, the politician emerge. And, through it all, give us an idea of the kind of role that he's played, and even how, his perception has also changed amid those who are actually rallying for independence.
Yes, well, I think Puigdemont was helped by a number of missteps by Madrid. The holding of the referendum, Rajoy should have, if he wanted to stop the referendum from going forward and for Puigdemont from getting political momentum, Madrid should have actually intercepted or either preemptively arrested the Catalan leaders before the referendum was held. By carrying out that police action, which was eventually, of course, televised, there's been a wave of sympathy, at least, for the Catalan independence movement, more about the police brutality rather than the actual necessary movement. And as you've mentioned, while he's claimed that 90% of those who voted, but the fact is only 43% of the electorate actually came out. So you're really looking at only about 39% of the people in Catalonia actually voted for independence. But the police action gave him the momentum to go forward to the next step, which was to make that declaration of independence, which he then immediately suspended.
Yes.
We assume Puigdemont is basically positioning, building up these cards in preparation for what he hopes to be a major set of negotiations with Madrid. So Rajoy, having made that initial misstep, is now becoming a lot more sensible about how he's handling this. So while one is demanded that the Declaration of Independence be annulled, but more importantly, he's formed an alliance with the socialists. He doesn't have a majority in the assembly, but he's formed an alliance with the socialists who have joined him to agree on Article 155. So therefore, that way he's ensured that the Catalans and Puigdemont are essentially isolated within Spain. They have no major party who is even taking a middle path regarding this. But the socialists have always argued that we are prepared for a dialogue with the Catalans, which Rajoy hasn't completely repudiated, at least a socialist position. So you see the possibility of some sort of a negotiation going on, but I think it's pretty clear my sense is that Rajoy, being representative of a conservative right-wing party, will see the dialogue as just a means to basically kill time until everybody forgets about this until the next round. Well, Puigdemont will actually, of course, seek some form of greater autonomy. And I think that is going to be the test that's going to happen, where the two sides will, having maneuvered each other into these various positions. And I think, as Professor Sachdeva has mentioned, the problem for the Catalans is they're relatively isolated. Puigdemont has not been able to get, despite the police brutality, has not been able to get much sympathy outside of Spain.
Yes.
And definitely the rest of Spain. I've been struck by a number of other parts of Spain which have had separatist movements, like the Basques and so on, have been relatively quiet. They haven't said very much in favor of the Catalans or protested or said anything to favor them. There have been a few protests, but not very much. So he hasn't been able to generate the kind of support I think he wanted to do outside Catalonia. So for right now, I would say the cards are largely, slightly more in Rajoy's favor than they are in Puigdemont, but we'll see how this plays out.
Does it help that, of course, he presses these sedition charges on the police head of Catalonia? He's also arrested 2 separatist leaders from there. Does it help him to a certain extent, Rajoy, in trying to control that situation, or is it going to create more unrest and violence on the streets?
Well, you know, at a time like this, when the situation is so confused and full of threats and counter-threats and so on, even in a relatively developed country, these are threats being bandied about. One really doesn't know whether they'll be followed up on. I mean, certainly if the leader, Puigdemont, is arrested on sedition charges, there's bound to be a backlash. There is a movement in Catalonia, there's no doubt about that. But I agree with my fellow panelists. This is each side trying to strengthen its position to start behind the scenes perhaps now and then later on in the public domain start negotiations which will end up in certain advantages for both, you know, each side looking for Madrid looking for a continuation of the status quo with minor modifications, and Catalonia perhaps walking back from its demand for full independence, but with not minor but major modifications and so on. So that will play out, I think, very quickly. I mean, events have been moving so fast. So we'll just have to wait and see.
But do we see such charges? Do you think such charges being imposed on even Carlos Puigdemont, for that matter? Do you see, developments of that kind happening, or is that taking
It will
too much
depend on how the situation evolves.
Okay.
Because sometimes, and we've seen this in God knows how many cases around the world, in Africa and Asia and in Europe itself, in situations like this, when, it's called the law of unintended consequences. You do something, and the consequences are certainly not what you expect them to be. I mean, the situation goes out of hand of the control of the leaderships, and I'm sure the saner minds on both sides will not want that to happen. So there will be, I think, people who will want the rhetoric and the demands to be moderated, for a dialogue to start, even if it's behind the scenes, and I'm sure that's going on. There will certainly be, as Professor said, not overt, but behind the scenes action from other European countries, the leaders like Germany and France and so on, who will maybe not take sides, but certainly take the side of, a dialogue, a toning down of rhetoric, sitting down on the table and talking. But certainly, what I said earlier in my first intervention, there is a regional dimension to it. There is a European dimension to this, and Europe is watching very, very carefully. And I think behind the scenes, there's a lot of talk going on because this has an echo in a number of other European countries.
Absolutely. And Professor Sachdeva, is that the reason why the EU has, refused to mediate in any way when it comes to this particular situation? Even though Carlos Puigdemont claimed initially to have said that, he does have the support of a few EU leaders, but even until today, we've got Donald Tusk, of course, who said that this is Spain's problem and they are going to solve it and we're not going to get into it. This is, of course, a calculated move because you really don't want to get into something and then you would have to deal with it in other countries as well.
Well, I think European leadership and the European elites, they are in a very difficult situation. One is that, in the past, if you look at these kind of independent movements, to some extent inside Europe and outside Europe, most of the European leaders and their legislatures in most of the countries, they were quite sympathetic to them. Now what is happening, something is happening with their own member state. The issues of national sovereignty and territorial integrity are at stake. So they have taken so far a kind of balanced kind of position on this, but I'm sure they are quite uncomfortable with the kind of scenes what you see on Barcelona. I mean, there is an independent movement which of course is there in Catalonia. There was police brutality, which is a fact. Now for European leaders, ignoring those kind of images is not an easy task. So obviously, I think for them that's why I was saying that there must be, even if they are not saying anything directly, I'm sure there must be some pressure on Spanish leadership to find certain solution to this, and things should not really go out of hand in Catalonia, which obviously will have implications for many other these kind of movements within Europe as well as also outside Europe. And if you look at their past position, whether on Kosovo or even on Crimea, now those were, of course, one can always find different context. But the situation is becoming very, very complicated for the European leadership also. Now, how Spanish leadership is going to manage, that of course would be very crucial, because ultimately, if they do declare independence, or even if they do not declare clear-cut independence, but somehow in the next couple of days, I mean, direct rule is kind of implemented. Now, what is the next step after this? You implement direct rule, then the further movement would be strengthened further with those kind of actions. And then what would happen next? So ultimately, you can't have direct rule forever. Next couple of weeks or couple of months, you have to have elections.
Yes.
And if after election these leaders again come back in Catalonian Parliament, then you're back to square one where you were before. So it means things are complicated. So how do they really resolve this? Nobody has, we do not know at this point of time. But I'm sure they will try to find some kind of compromise. And I'm sure even Catalonian leaders they also know the limits. So they are trying to find a way in which ultimately down the road, maybe after 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, some kind of commitment that we can have a legally binding referendum, which they may not get today. Step by step, this is what perhaps I think their ultimate goal would be. And while doing this, now, as a result of Catalonian movement, now even the right-wing party is also becoming more stronger within Spain, which they were not before, because now the nationalistic issue. So, this will have impact on the overall national politics within Europe, within Spain, and then within Europe. And of course, then the European positions on these kind of independent movements outside Europe as well. Now, even Russia has supported clearly that this is a Spanish, internal affair. But immediately they have also pointed out that, EU took very different position on Kosovo. And similarly, the Serbian, the president has also said the same thing.
Interesting you bring up the right-wing politics angle because, I was reading various articles on this and one of them, in fact, a few of them, in fact, was saying that this is not just a fight for nationalism. There's something more at play here. Do you agree?
Well, the point is that Spain, the present fissures in Spanish politics arose from the 2008-2009 financial crisis. There had been, as was mentioned, the Catalan independence movement has gone back to at least the 1930s. But actually, before 2008-2009, Spain's economy had been booming. The Basques, who had been the separatist movement that had plagued Spain for several decades, and ETA had actually been a terrorist organization that the Basques had generated out of that, as opposed to the Catalans, who are otherwise relatively non-violent. Even that movement had more or less had given up its attempts to form a separate Basque state. But after 2008, 2009, you saw both within the Spanish mainstream the rise of an insurgent party, the Podemos, who has basically denounced both the socialists and the conservatives, and argued for a revamp of Spain and a sort of left-wing anarchist sentiment response. But then you also see that Catalonia, which was the richest province in Spain, we started to see a sense of Catalonian independence movement starting to get traction, that we could have been better off if we'd been outside of Spain. And so a lot of this feeds into, that's fed in. The point is that the Eurozone is actually now beginning to recover economically from the great global financial crisis, followed by the Eurozone crisis. And now, if you look at the OECD figures, almost every European country, for the first time, has positive economic growth rates.
Okay.
And all the major European economies definitely are starting to see an uptick in growth, and definitely the G7 members. Brexit has been the only really destabilizing influence, but the impact of Brexit will be largely negative to Britain more than it will be to continental Europe. So I think if I'm in Madrid, having made one major misstep in terms of waiting too long on the referendum, if I'm Rajoy, I will expect that the rest of Spain will to me politically. I'll be in a much stronger position regarding Podemos in the next election. But also, if I can just delay, and if the Spanish economic recovery takes place. Remember, other thing that Puigdemont has to face is that Catalonia he's facing economic pressure.
Yes.
Last count, over 700 companies have relocated out of Barcelona for fear that they're going to be stuck in a small regional state that is neither a member of the European Union or a member of Spain or face a political crisis of some variety. So you're seeing, and tourism, which is many ways one of the single largest,
yes,
has dipped quite dramatically. So if I'm a Barcelonian, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm not too sure this is worth it.
Okay.
So that as time plays out, I would say it'd be Rajoy's favor that he basically delay.
Okay.
The longer he delays, the economic pressures on Puigdemont get higher, and his ability to isolate Puigdemont, whether in Catalonia or elsewhere, will probably increase.
All right. So there have been missteps, of course, from both sides, and we hope we'll hope that eventually both sides, in fact, react to the developments at the moment and a dialogue takes place and things do settle down for Spain at the moment. Well, that's all the time we have, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me on The Big Picture. Well, Spain is a country that has seen 3 civil wars, in fact, in the last 180 years. So they definitely know how unrest eventually develops into something bigger. And we hope that at the moment, the Mariano Rajoy government does decide on dialogue rather than taking stern actions. That's it for the moment. Thank you so much, though, for joining me on The Big Picture.